The wind cut through Sophia Ashford like a blade made of ice, her threadbare dress doing nothing to shield her from the bitter February cold that swept down from the mountains surrounding Cody, Wyoming. She pressed herself against the weathered wood of Miller's general store, her teeth chattering so violently she thought they might shatter, watching the last light of day fade behind the jagged peaks, while wondering if this was how her story would end, frozen and alone at 22 years old in a town where nobody knew her name. She had been standing there for nearly an hour, clutching the empty carpet bag that held everything she owned, which amounted to one change of clothes and a photograph of parents she barely remembered. The stagecoach had deposited her here 3 hours ago, and the address she'd been given for her supposed employment as a seamstress turned out to be an abandoned building with boarded windows and a notice of foreclosure nailed to the door. The man who'd hired her through correspondence, a Mr. Wendell claiming to run a respectable dress shop, didn't exist, or at least nobody in town had heard of him. She'd spent her last dollar on that stagecoach ticket from Cheyenne, believing she was traveling toward a new beginning, only to find herself stranded in a mountain town as winter tightened its grip. The general store had closed an hour ago, the proprietor giving her a suspicious look as he locked the door and told her she couldn't loiter there all night. But where else could she go? The boarding house wanted payment up front, the hotel was beyond her means, and the temperature was dropping so fast she could see her breath forming clouds of white vapor. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves, and her feet felt like blocks of ice in her worn boots. She thought about walking, just to keep her blood moving, but exhaustion and hunger made even that seem impossible. She closed her eyes, trying to remember warmth, trying to recall the feeling of safety she'd known as a child before the fever took her mother and the mine collapse claimed her father. She'd been shuffled between relatives who saw her as a burden, working as a servant in houses where she wasn't quite family and wasn't quite staff, always in that uncomfortable middle ground. When the advertisement for a seamstress position in Wyoming had appeared in the Cheyenne newspaper, it had seemed like providence, like finally she might build something of her own. The sound of boots on the wooden sidewalk made her open her eyes. A man was approaching, tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette outlined against the fading light. She tensed, knowing that a woman alone and desperate was vulnerable in ways she didn't want to consider. But as he drew closer, she saw his face, weathered and sun-bronzed beneath the brim of his hat, with blue eyes that held concern rather than menace. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the wind, "you're shivering something fierce." Sophia tried to speak, but her jaw was locked from the cold. She managed a nod, wrapping her arms tighter around herself in a futile attempt to contain what little warmth remained in her body. The man didn't hesitate. He shrugged out of his heavy coat, a thick sheepskin-lined duster that had probably cost more than she'd earned in 6 months, and stepped forward to drape it over her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming, carrying the scent of leather and sage and something else, something distinctly masculine that made her aware of just how close he was standing. "Can't have you freezing to death outside Miller's," he said, adjusting the coat so it covered her properly. It was enormous on her frame, the hem nearly reaching her ankles, but it was like being wrapped in a blanket fresh from the fire. "I'm Tobias Sullivan. Most folks call me Toby." "Sophia," she managed through chattering teeth. "Sophia Ashford." "Well, Miss Ashford, seems to me you're in some kind of trouble." His eyes searched her face, taking in the exhaustion and fear she knew must be written there. "When's the last time you ate?" she tried to remember. There had been some bread and cheese on the stagecoach yesterday morning, but that felt like a lifetime ago. She shook her head, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. Tobias frowned, and she noticed the line between his brows deepened when he was concerned. He looked to be in his late 20s, with brown hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with stubble. There was something solid about him, something that made her want to trust him even though every lesson she'd learned warned her against trusting strange men in strange towns. "The restaurant's still open," he said. "You're going to come with me and get some food in you, and then you're going to tell me how you ended up freezing outside a closed store." Pride made her want to refuse, made her want to insist she could handle her own problems, but survival instinct was stronger. She nodded, and when he offered his arm, she took it, grateful for the support as her stiff legs struggled to carry her down the sidewalk. The restaurant was a small establishment called Clara's Kitchen, warm and bright with oil lamps, and filled with the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread that made Sophia's empty stomach clench painfully. Tobias guided her to a table near the wood stove and helped her into a chair before taking the seat across from her. A woman in her 50s with gray streaked hair and kind eyes approached their table. "Toby Sullivan, haven't seen you in town for a month. Thought maybe you'd frozen up there on that ranch of yours." "Takes more than a Wyoming winter to freeze me out, Clara," Tobias said with a slight smile. "We need 2 of whatever you've got hot and plenty of it, and coffee, strong as you can make it." Clara's gaze shifted to Sophia, taking in her pale face and the way she was still trembling despite the warmth of the coat and the restaurant. Understanding crossed her features, the kind of understanding that came from years of seeing people down on their luck. "I'll bring out some soup first, get you warmed up proper." When Clara disappeared into the kitchen, Sophia found herself under Tobias's steady gaze. She swallowed hard, trying to organize her thoughts into something coherent. "I need to pay you back for the meal. I don't have money now, but I can work, I can sew, I can clean, I can—" "Stop," Tobias said gently, holding up a hand. "Let's start with you telling me what brought you to Cody." So she told him, the words spilling out between sips of the hot soup Clara brought, about the advertisement and the letter from Mr. Wendell and the job that didn't exist. She told him about spending her last money on the stagecoach ticket, about finding the abandoned building, about asking around town and learning that nobody had ever heard of a dress shop or anyone named Wendell. "It was a scheme," Tobias said, his jaw tightening. "Some man advertising for women to come work, getting them stranded here with no money and no way home. Then he'd offer them alternative employment, if you catch my meaning." Sophia felt her face flush with shame and anger. She'd been so desperate for a fresh start, so eager to believe in the possibility of honest work and a decent life, that she'd walked straight into a trap. "But nobody came for me. Nobody offered me anything." "Because you were smart enough to stay in public view," Tobias said. "And because I found you first." He leaned back as Clara brought their main course, thick steaks with potatoes and beans. "Eat up. You'll feel better with food in you, and then we'll figure out what comes next." Sophia wanted to argue that there was no "we" in her problems, that he'd already done more than anyone could expect from a stranger, but the food demanded her attention. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating, and then it took all her self-control not to devour everything on her plate like a starving animal. Tobias ate more slowly, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When she finally set down her fork, feeling more human than she had in days, he cleared his throat. "I own a ranch about 10 miles north of town, the Broken Arrow, named for the creek that runs through the property. It's not fancy, but it's profitable enough, and it's more work than one man can handle alone." Sophia felt her heart begin to pound. "I don't know anything about ranching." "Didn't figure you did," he said, "but a ranch needs more than cattle work. Needs someone to manage the house, do the cooking and cleaning, help with the books and the correspondence. My aunt used to handle all that, but she passed last spring, and I've been making do poorly ever since." He met her eyes directly. "I'm offering you a job, Miss Ashford. Room and board plus wages. Honest work with no expectations beyond what I've stated." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Sophia had learned that lesson the hard way already. "Why would you help me? You don't know anything about me." "I know you're far from home, desperate, and decent enough to worry about paying for a meal even when you're half frozen," Tobias said. "I know you've got good handwriting, judging from that letter you showed me from Wendell, which means you've had some education. And I know I'm tired of burning my own cooking and living in a house that's falling apart because I don't have time to maintain it properly." He paused. "I also know what it's like to be alone in the world with nobody to turn to. My parents died when I was 17, left me with a failing ranch and debts I'm still paying off 10 years later. If someone hadn't given me a chance back then, I wouldn't have survived." There was honesty in his voice, a rawness that made Sophia want to believe him. But trust was a luxury she'd learned she couldn't afford. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," Tobias admitted. "Just like I don't know I can trust you not to rob me blind and disappear in the night. But Clara knows me, and so does everyone else in this town. You can ask about me, about my reputation. And if you come out to the ranch and don't like what you find, I'll bring you back to town and pay for a room at the boarding house until you can figure out your next step." Clara, who had been hovering nearby with the coffee pot, chose that moment to interject. "Toby Sullivan is one of the good ones, honey. Hard worker, honest dealer. Never heard a bad word about him except that he's too stubborn for his own good sometimes." "Appreciate the endorsement, Clara," Tobias said dryly. Sophia looked between them, weighing her options. She could refuse, could try to find another way, but what other way was there? She had no money, no prospects, and winter in Wyoming was not forgiving to those without shelter. At least this offer came with witnesses, with people who knew the man making it. At least she had a chance to verify his character before committing to anything. "I'll come see the ranch," she said finally, "but I'm not promising anything beyond that." "Fair enough," Tobias said, and his slight smile transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "We'll head out first thing tomorrow morning. Tonight you'll stay at the boarding house and I'll cover the cost." "I'll pay you back," Sophia insisted. "From my wages, once I start earning them. If you take the job," Tobias corrected. "Though something tells me you're not the type to back down from hard work." He was right about that. Sophia had been working since she was old enough to hold a needle, had spent her whole life making herself useful so she wouldn't be cast aside. Hard work didn't frighten her. What frightened her was hope, that treacherous feeling that whispered maybe this time things could be different. After they finished eating, Tobias walked her to the boarding house, a tidy 2-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher. He arranged for a room and paid for 2 nights upfront, over Sophia's protests, and then stood awkwardly in the hallway as if unsure how to take his leave. "Your coat," Sophia said, starting to shrug out of the heavy duster. "Keep it for tonight," Tobias said. "You can give it back tomorrow. I'll come by at 8 to collect you." Sophia clutched the coat tighter, still feeling the warmth of it, and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for everything." "Toby," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Miss Ashford." He tipped his hat to her and headed for the stairs, leaving her standing in the hallway with a full stomach, a warm coat, and the first stirring of something that might have been hope. The room Mrs. Fletcher showed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in quilts and a window that looked out over the main street. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in Tobias's coat, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. This morning she'd been on a stagecoach, full of plans and expectations. This afternoon she'd been freezing and desperate. Tonight she had food and shelter and the possibility of employment. And tomorrow she would go to a stranger's ranch and decide whether to trust him with her future. She pulled the coat closer, breathing in the scent of it, and found herself thinking about the way Tobias had looked at her with concern rather than pity. The way he'd offered help without making her feel like a charity case. She thought about his blue eyes and the line between his brows when he frowned, the way his voice rumbled deep and steady. Then she shook her head sharply, reminding herself that she couldn't afford to be distracted by a handsome face and a kind gesture. She needed to stay practical, stay focused on survival. Romance was for girls who had the luxury of choice, and she'd learned long ago that she wasn't one of them. But as she finally climbed under the quilts and closed her eyes, warm and fed for the first time in days, she couldn't quite stop herself from wondering what tomorrow would bring. The morning dawned clear and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that made the inside of your nose freeze when you breathed. Sophia dressed in her only other outfit, a plain gray dress that was slightly less worn than the one she'd traveled in, and braided her long, dark hair with care. She wanted to look presentable, capable, like someone worth hiring. Tobias arrived exactly at 8, dressed in work clothes with a different coat, this one brown leather. His horse was tied outside, a sturdy bay gelding, and behind it was a wagon loaded with supplies. "Morning," he said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Sophia admitted. "Thank you again for arranging it. Thank Mrs. Fletcher. She's got the most comfortable beds in town." He gestured to the wagon. "Picked up supplies while I was here, so we'll have to ride in the wagon instead of on horseback. Hope you don't mind." Sophia climbed up onto the wagon seat, grateful for the relative comfort compared to horseback, which she'd never been particularly good at anyway. Tobias settled beside her and took up the reins, clicking to the horse to start moving, as they left Cody behind, heading north into country that grew increasingly wild and beautiful. Tobias pointed out landmarks and explained the lay of the land. The Shoshone River glittered to the west, and the mountains rose in every direction, their peaks white with snow against the brilliant blue sky. "Gets lonely out here in winter," Tobias said after they'd been riding for a while. "Sometimes I don't see another person for weeks at a time." "It's not for everyone." "I've spent most of my life in cities," Sophia admitted, "but lonely doesn't scare me. I've been alone in crowds before. At least out here the solitude would be honest." Tobias glanced at her with what might have been approval. "That's a wise way to look at it." They talked as they traveled, and Sophia found herself relaxing despite her nerves. Tobias had an easy way about him, not pushing for information but answering her questions readily. He told her about building up the ranch over the past 10 years, about the harsh winters and dry summers, about the satisfaction of watching his herd grow and his land prosper. "It's not an easy life," he said, "but it's mine, built with my own hands and my own choices. That means something." Sophia understood that desire for ownership, for something that belonged to you because you'd earned it. She'd spent her whole life in borrowed spaces, dependent on the charity or tolerance of others. The idea of having a place, even if it was just as an employee, appealed to her more than she wanted to admit. The ranch, when they finally reached it, was more impressive than she'd expected. The house was a solid 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch and good bones, though it clearly needed attention. The barn was large and well maintained, and there were several other outbuildings scattered around the property. The land stretched out in every direction, rolling hills covered in winter grass and brush, with the mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. "It's beautiful," Sophia said honestly. "It's rough," Tobias countered, helping her down from the wagon, "but it's got potential. Come on, I'll show you the house." Inside was chaos. Not dirty exactly, but cluttered and disorganized, with dishes piled in the sink and papers scattered across every surface. The furniture was good quality but haphazardly arranged, and there were clear signs that the man living here had no idea how to maintain a proper household. "I know it's a mess," Tobias said, sounding embarrassed. "I tried to clean up yesterday, but that just made it worse somehow." Sophia walked through the rooms, assessing. The kitchen was large with a good stove and plenty of counter space. The parlor had potential with its stone fireplace and tall windows. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, one clearly in use and the others gathering dust. There was even a small room that might have been a sewing room at one point, with good light and built-in shelves. The job would be managing all of this, Tobias said, following her through the house. Cooking, cleaning, mending, helping with the ranch accounts and correspondence. "I'd expect you up by 6 to start breakfast, and your time would be your own after evening dishes are done, usually around 7. Sundays are light work only. You'd have your own room and your privacy would be respected absolutely." "What about wages?" Sophia asked, trying to keep her voice businesslike. $20 a month plus room and board," Tobias said. "That's fair wages for this kind of work, and you'd have access to the wagon if you needed to go to town." It was more than fair. It was generous. Sophia had worked for less in positions that demanded more and offered nothing like the independence he was describing. She walked to the window, looking out over the ranch land, trying to find the catch, the hidden problem that would make this offer too good to be true. "Why haven't you hired someone before now?" she asked. "Surely there are women in town who would want this position." Tobias was quiet for a moment. "I asked around after my aunt died, but most of the women here are either married or have families they're caring for. The few who might have been interested had fathers or brothers who made it clear they didn't approve of their daughter or sister living out here alone with a bachelor rancher." He paused. "People talk and reputations matter. I didn't want to put anyone in a difficult position." "But you don't mind putting me in one?" Sophia asked, turning to face him. "You're already in a difficult position," Tobias said bluntly. "At least here you'd have honest work and fair pay while you figure out your next step, and you don't have family here to worry about gossip." He met her eyes. "But if reputation concerns you, I understand. Clara in town knows you're coming out here and Mrs. Fletcher too. I won't keep you isolated. You'll have chances to go to town, to build connections, to make sure people know you're being treated properly." It was more consideration than most employers would show. Sophia took a deep breath, weighing her limited options one more time. She could take this job, which offered security and decent wages, but came with the risk of isolation and potential scandal. Or she could refuse and try to find something else, though what that might be she had no idea. "I'll take it," she said finally. "Trial period of 1 month for both of us. If either of us wants to end the arrangement after that, we can do so without hard feelings." Tobias's face relaxed into a genuine smile. "That's fair. Welcome to the Broken Arrow, Miss Ashford. If we're going to be working together, you should call me Sophia." "Sophia," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his rough voice. "Let me show you which room would be yours, and then I need to tend to the animals. You can spend today getting settled and figuring out the house. We'll start the regular schedule tomorrow." He showed her to a room on the 2nd floor with a view of the mountains, furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair. It was simple but comfortable, and it was hers, at least for now. After Tobias headed out to the barn, Sophia unpacked her meager belongings and then spent the rest of the day exploring the house more thoroughly. The kitchen became her priority. She washed the accumulated dishes, organized the pantry, and took stock of what supplies were available. There was plenty of basic staples, flour and sugar and salt, as well as preserved goods and smoked meat. She could work with this. By the time Tobias came in for supper, she had a simple meal ready, fried potatoes and bacon with biscuits she'd managed to throw together. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at the table she'd set, at the order she'd already begun to impose on the chaos. "This is more than I expected on your first day," he said. "I needed to keep busy," Sophia admitted. "Helps me think." They sat down to eat, and Sophia noticed how Tobias seemed unsure how to behave, as if having someone across the table from him was a novelty. They ate in silence for a few minutes before he cleared his throat. "This is good. Really good. I'd forgotten what decent cooking tastes like." "Wait until I have time to actually plan proper meals," Sophia said. "This was just thrown together from what was available, still better than anything I've made in months." He took another biscuit, slathering it with butter. "You have any questions about how things work around here?" Sophia had dozens of questions, and they spent the rest of the meal discussing practical matters. What time he usually woke, what he needed for breakfast, how he wanted the household accounts managed. It was all very businesslike and proper, exactly how an employer and employee should interact. But Sophia found herself noticing things that had nothing to do with business. The way his hands moved when he talked, rough and calloused from years of ranch work. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her opinions mattered. She reminded herself sternly that she was here to work, not to develop foolish feelings for her employer. That way lay disaster. She'd seen it happen to other women, seen how quickly admiration could turn to exploitation, how easy it was for a man to take advantage of a woman dependent on him for her livelihood. But Tobias didn't seem like that kind of man. He seemed genuinely grateful for her help, genuinely interested in making this arrangement work for both of them. When he said goodnight and headed upstairs to his own room, Sophia found herself smiling as she finished cleaning up the kitchen. Maybe, just maybe, she'd found somewhere she could stay for a while. The days fell into a rhythm quickly. Sophia rose before dawn to start breakfast, feeding Tobias well before he headed out to tend the cattle and handle the endless work that came with running a ranch in winter. While he was outside, she tackled the house, cleaning and organizing room by room, slowly transforming the bachelor chaos into something approaching a proper home. She discovered she liked the work, liked the satisfaction of seeing immediate results from her efforts. She liked having control over her environment, being able to make decisions about how things should be arranged. And she liked the evenings, when Tobias would come in tired and cold, and she'd have hot food waiting and a warm fire burning. They talked more as the weeks passed. Tobias told her about his parents, who died in a flu epidemic that swept through Wyoming in 1876, leaving him alone at 17 with a struggling ranch and more debt than assets. He told her about the hard years that followed, about nearly losing everything multiple times, about the satisfaction of finally turning a profit after years of barely scraping by. Sophia found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, about the loneliness of being passed between relatives who saw her as an obligation, about the constant feeling of being unwanted, about the dream of having something of her own, a place where she belonged. "You belong here," Tobias said one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. "This place has felt more like a home in the 3 weeks you've been here than it has in the whole time I've owned it." Sophia felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "It's good work. Honest work. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "I'm the one who should be grateful," Tobias said. He was sitting in the chair across from her, his long legs stretched toward the fire, and there was something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "You've done more than I hired you for, Sophia. You've made this place feel lived in, cared for. That matters more than you probably realize." She didn't know what to say to that, so she focused on her mending, trying to ignore the way her heart was beating too fast. This was dangerous territory, this growing comfort between them, this sense of partnership that went beyond employer and employee. She needed to remember her place, remember the risks. But it was hard to remember when he looked at her like that, with something in his eyes that might have been longing. March came with warmer days and the first signs of spring, though the nights were still cold enough to freeze. Sophia had been at the ranch for 6 weeks, and the trial period they'd agreed on had passed without either of them mentioning it. She assumed that meant the arrangement was working, that she'd proven her value. What she hadn't anticipated was how much she'd come to care about this place, about the work, about the man who owned it. She watched Tobias from the kitchen window as he worked with the horses in the corral, admiring the easy confidence of his movements, the strength in his shoulders. She found herself looking forward to mealtimes, to the conversations they'd have over coffee, to the sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. It was foolish and dangerous and completely unprofessional, but she was falling for him. The realization hit her one evening as she was cooking supper. Tobias had come in early, unusually quiet, and was sitting at the kitchen table going through the account books. She glanced over at him, at the way he frowned in concentration, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. This was more than admiration or gratitude. This was the real thing, the kind of feeling that could break her heart if she let it. "Something wrong?" Tobias asked, looking up and catching her staring. "No, just thinking," Sophia said quickly, turning back to the stove. "About what?" She couldn't very well tell him the truth. "About how much this place has changed in 6 weeks. It's almost unrecognizable." "That's your doing," Tobias said. He stood and crossed to where she was working, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Sophia, I need to talk to you about something." Her heart sank. This was it. He was going to tell her the arrangement wasn't working, that she needed to leave. She'd let herself get too comfortable, too hopeful, and now she'd pay the price. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about this for weeks now, trying to figure out the right way to say it." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "The thing is, I hired you to manage my house, but somewhere along the way things changed. At least they did for me." Sophia turned to face him fully, holding her breath. "I care about you," Tobias said, his blue eyes intense on hers. "More than an employer should care about an employee, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. And I know that puts you in a difficult position, because you depend on me for your livelihood. I know I shouldn't be saying this at all, but I can't keep pretending that's all this is between us." "Tobias," Sophia whispered, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "If you don't feel the same way, we'll never speak of it again," he continued. "You'll keep your job for as long as you want it, with no awkwardness or hard feelings. I promise you that. But if there's any chance that you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I needed you to know." Sophia stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. He cared about her. This strong, honest man who'd saved her from freezing and given her a chance when she had nothing, he cared about her. And she cared about him too, had been trying not to for weeks now. "I feel it too," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I've been trying not to, trying to keep things professional, but I feel it too." The smile that broke across Tobias's face was like sunrise. He reached for her hands, his rough palms warm against her cold fingers. "Then we're in this together." "I don't know what this is," Sophia admitted. "I don't know how it works when your employer is also the man you care about." "We'll figure it out," Tobias said. "Together." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. "I'm not going to rush you, Sophia. We'll take this slow, do it right. But I want you to know that what I'm feeling isn't temporary or casual. When I look at you, I see a future. I see a partner. I see home." Sophia felt tears slip down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the emotion in his voice, by the sincerity in his eyes. Nobody had ever looked at her like that before, like she was precious, like she mattered. "I see it too," she whispered. Tobias pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the warm kitchen while the supper simmered on the stove, and Sophia felt something inside her that had been tense and guarded for years finally relax. This was real. This was happening. And for the first time in her life, she was going to let herself believe in a happy ending. They took it slow, as Tobias had promised. He courted her properly, taking her on rides around the ranch property when the weather allowed, teaching her about the land and the cattle and the rhythms of ranch life. He brought her wildflowers when they started blooming in April and spent evenings teaching her to play chess by the fire. Sophia continued her work managing the household, but now there was an easiness between them that hadn't existed before, a sense of partnership that went beyond employer and employee. They made plans together for improvements to the ranch, discussing everything from expanding the herd to adding another room onto the house. "I never had anyone to plan with before," Tobias admitted one evening. "I made all the decisions alone, for better or worse. But this feels right, having your input, considering our future instead of just mine." "Our future," Sophia repeated, loving the sound of those words. They shared their first kiss on a warm evening in May, standing on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. Tobias cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I think I've loved you since I saw you shivering outside Miller's store, looking so lost and so determined at the same time." "I love you too," Sophia said, and realized she'd never said those words to anyone before. It felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Tobias kissed her again, deeper this time, and Sophia let herself fall into him, trusting that he would catch her. By June, everyone in Cody knew that Tobias Sullivan was courting his housekeeper, and opinion was divided. Some people, like Clara at the restaurant and Mrs. Fletcher at the boarding house, thought it was romantic and were rooting for them. Others thought it was scandalous and improper, a bachelor rancher and a woman with no family or connections. Sophia tried not to care about the gossip, but it was hard when women would stop talking as she passed in the general store, or when she'd catch disapproving looks at Sunday church services. Tobias noticed her discomfort and addressed it head-on. "Marry me," he said one evening in early July. They were sitting on the porch watching the stars come out, and the words seemed to come out of nowhere. Sophia turned to stare at him. "What? Marry me?" Tobias repeated. He took her hand, his expression serious. "I know it's only been 5 months since you came here, and maybe that seems fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Sophia. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this ranch together, raise a family together, grow old together." Sophia felt tears prickling her eyes. People are already talking about us. If we get married, they'll say I trapped you, that I used my position to manipulate you into proposing. Let them talk, Tobias said fiercely. I don't give a damn what anyone thinks except you. Do you want to marry me? Not because of gossip or scandal or what's proper, but because you love me and want to share your life with me. Yes, Sophia said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. Yes, I want that more than anything. Tobias pulled a small box from his pocket, and Sophia laughed through her tears when she saw it. You had this planned. I've been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, he admitted. Inside the box was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing fancy but beautiful in its simplicity. It was my grandmother's ring. My father gave it to my mother, and she gave it to me before she died, made me promise to give it to someone I loved as much as they loved each other. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all this time for her. Sophia looked down at it, at the way it caught the starlight, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. She was going to be married. She was going to belong somewhere to someone, not as an obligation or a burden, but as a chosen partner. Wear my name too, Tobias said softly, echoing the sentiment from that first night when he'd wrapped her in his coat. Be mine, and let me be yours. Yes, Sophia said again, and kissed him under the stars, sealing the promise between them. They were married in August, a simple ceremony at the church in Cody with Clara and Mrs. Fletcher as witnesses. Sophia wore a dress she'd made herself, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar, and carried wildflowers that Tobias had picked that morning. She'd never felt more beautiful than when she saw the look on his face as she walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was brief, the vows traditional, but when Tobias said, I do, and slipped a matching gold band on her finger, Sophia felt the full weight of what they were promising each other. For better or worse, in sickness and health, until death parted them. She was choosing this, choosing him, and he was choosing her right back. The kiss that sealed their marriage was chaste enough for church, but the promise in it made Sophia's breath catch. Tonight she would truly become his wife in every sense, would share his bed and his life completely. They had a small reception at Clara's restaurant. Nothing fancy, but filled with good food, and the few friends they'd made in town. Even some of the people who'd been skeptical about their courtship seemed to warm up when they saw how happy Tobias and Sophia were together, how naturally they moved around each other like two parts of a whole. As the sun began to set, Tobias took Sophia's hand and led her out to the wagon for the ride back to the ranch. Their ranch now, their home together. Someone had decorated the wagon with ribbons and tin cans, and Sophia laughed at the noise they made rattling down the road. Happy? Tobias asked, his arm around her shoulders as he guided the horse with one hand. Happier than I ever thought possible, Sophia said honestly. 6 months ago I was freezing outside a general store, completely alone in the world. Now I have a husband, a home, a future. It doesn't seem real. It's real, Tobias assured her. And it's forever. Sophia Sullivan, you're stuck with me now. Good, she said, leaning into him. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Tobias taking his time and making sure Sophia felt cherished and safe. It was her first time, and though there was some discomfort, there was also intimacy and connection that went beyond the physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed they would now share, and Sophia traced patterns on Tobias's chest while he played with her long hair. I was so lonely before you came, Tobias said quietly. I didn't even realize how lonely until suddenly I wasn't anymore. You filled up all the empty spaces, Sophia, made this house a home, made my life worth living. You saved me, Sophia said, literally and figuratively. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't found me that night." "I'm glad I did," Tobias said, kissing her forehead. "Best decision I ever made, wrapping you in my coat and deciding you were worth helping. Look what it got me." Sophia smiled against his skin, feeling more content than she'd ever felt in her life. This was where she belonged. This was home. The seasons turned, and Sophia settled fully into her new life as Mrs. Tobias Sullivan. She threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, sewing curtains and quilts, planting a vegetable garden, working alongside Tobias to build the life they'd envisioned together. By winter, she was pregnant, the baby due in early spring. Tobias was over the moon about becoming a father, constantly worrying about her health and trying to stop her from doing too much work. Sophia found his protectiveness endearing, even when it was excessive. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one evening when he'd insisted on carrying a basket that weighed all of 5 pounds. "You're carrying my child," Tobias countered. "That makes you the most precious thing in the world to me. Let me fuss." Their son was born in March of 1887, a year almost to the day after Sophia had accepted the job at the Broken Arrow. They named him Thomas, and he had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Tobias held his son with a gentleness that made Sophia fall in love with him all over again, watching this strong rancher reduced to tears by the tiny person they'd created together. "He's perfect," Tobias whispered, tracing Thomas's tiny features with one finger. "You're perfect." "I can't believe how lucky I am." "We're lucky," Sophia corrected, reaching up to cup his cheek. "All three of us." Motherhood suited Sophia in ways she hadn't expected. She loved nursing her son, loved watching him grow and change, loved seeing Tobias with him. They would sit together in the evenings, Sophia rocking Thomas while Tobias read aloud from the newspaper or worked on the account books, and Sophia would think about how impossible this happiness would have seemed just a year ago. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Tobias expanded the herd and bought more land, building the Broken Arrow into one of the most successful operations in the region. Sophia managed the business side with efficiency, her education and natural intelligence serving them well. They made a good team, each complementing the other's strengths. Their family grew too. A daughter, Sarah, arrived in 1889, followed by another son, Theodore, in 1891. The house Tobias had built for just himself now rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing, and Sophia couldn't imagine it any other way. She watched her children grow, teaching them to read and write, telling them stories about the world beyond the ranch. Thomas was serious and responsible like his father, already helping with ranch work even though he was barely 10. Sarah was spirited and independent, more interested in riding horses than learning to sew. Theodore was still young but showed signs of being the charmer of the family. "You've given me everything I didn't know I wanted," Tobias told Sophia on their 10th anniversary. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a tradition they'd maintained even as life got busier and more complicated. A home, a family, a partner in every sense of the word. "I couldn't have built any of this without you. We built it together," Sophia said, lacing her fingers through his. "That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? Two people building something neither could create alone." She thought back to that freezing February night when she'd been shivering outside Miller's store, convinced her story was ending badly. She thought about the coat Tobias had wrapped around her, the warmth and kindness he'd shown a desperate stranger. She thought about the risk she'd taken in trusting him, in accepting his help, in eventually giving him her heart. It had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every risk taken, every leap of faith had led her here, to this porch with this man and this life they'd created. She was Sophia Sullivan, wife and mother and partner, beloved and belonging. She had a home that was truly hers, a family she'd chosen and that had chosen her back. "What are you thinking about?" Tobias asked, noticing the expression on her face. "About coats and general stores and frozen February nights," Sophia said with a smile. "About how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best futures." "I think about that night too," Tobias admitted. "About how close I came to not going into town that day. I almost stayed at the ranch, almost put off the supply run until the next week. If I had, I never would have found you." "We found each other," Sophia said. "That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Inside the house, they could hear their children arguing good-naturedly about something, and the sound made Sophia smile. This was the life she'd dreamed of without even knowing it, the belonging she'd searched for in all the wrong places until finally finding it here. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their children. Thomas took to ranching like he was born for it, working alongside his father from dawn to dusk. Sarah eventually did learn to sew, though she still preferred horses, and proved to have a talent for training them. Theodore grew into his charm, becoming the family peacemaker and social butterfly. Sophia watched them all with pride and love, these people who existed because she'd taken a chance on a cold February night. She and Tobias grew older together, their love deepening with each year that passed. They'd weathered hard times, droughts and harsh winters and market crashes, but they'd always weathered them together. In the summer of 1906, 20 years after that fateful meeting outside the general store, Sophia and Tobias stood together at Thomas's wedding. Their son was marrying a good woman from a neighboring ranch, and the joy on his face as he said his vows reminded Sophia of how Tobias had looked at their own wedding. "We started something good," Tobias murmured to her during the reception. "Look at all these people, this family, this life. All because I gave you my coat." "All because you gave me a chance," Sophia corrected. "The coat just kept me warm. You gave me so much more." "We gave each other everything," Tobias said, pulling her close despite the fact that they were in public and probably too old for such displays. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." By the time they celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1916, the Broken Arrow Ranch was a thriving multi-generational operation. Thomas and his wife lived in a house they'd built on the property and were raising 4 children of their own. Sarah had married a rancher from Montana and visited often with her growing family. Theodore had surprised everyone by going to college and becoming a lawyer, though he still came home for every holiday and important occasion. Sophia and Tobias moved a bit slower now, their hair gray and their joints stiff, but the love between them was as strong as ever. They still sat on the porch watching sunsets, still held hands under the dinner table, still found ways to make each other laugh. "You ever regret it?" Sophia asked one evening. "Stopping that night, taking a chance on a stranger?" "Never," Tobias said firmly. "You were never a stranger, Sophia. From the moment I saw you shivering outside that store, you were mine. I just had to convince you of it." "You did a pretty good job," Sophia said with a smile. 30 years later and I'm still convinced." "Good," Tobias said, kissing her temple, "because I plan on at least 30 more." They didn't get quite that long. Tobias died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1920, his hand still holding Sophia's, just as it had for 34 years of marriage. Sophia grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they'd built together, in the knowledge that she'd been truly loved and had loved truly in return. She lived another 8 years, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the broken arrow would continue for generations. When she died in the spring of 1928, surrounded by family in the house she'd helped build, her last thoughts were of a cold February night and a warm coat, and a man who looked at her with kindness in his eyes. They buried her next to Tobias on a hill overlooking the ranch, and her grandchildren told stories of the legendary love story that had started it all. The freezing night, the coat, the proposal under the stars. How sometimes the worst moments of your life could lead to the best if you were brave enough to accept help when it was offered. The Broken Arrow Ranch continued to prosper, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But it all began with a shivering woman outside a general store and a cowboy who wrapped her in his coat and, eventually, in his heart. A love story for the ages, built on kindness and trust and the courage to believe in second chances. Tobias Sullivan, now an old man himself, would sit on the porch of the original ranch house and tell his grandchildren about his parents. About how his father had found his mother on the coldest night of the year and saved her life. About how they'd built something beautiful together from almost nothing. About how love, real love, was worth any risk. Grandma used to say that Grandpa saved her that night, Thomas would tell them. But Grandpa always said she saved him right back. That's what real love is. Two people saving each other, over and over, in 1,000 small ways. The children would listen wide-eyed, and then they'd run off to play, secure in the knowledge that they came from love, that their family had been built on something solid and true. And the ranch would continue, generation after generation, a testament to a cold February night and a warm coat and two people brave enough to believe in each other. The story lived on, told and retold, embellished and cherished. The coat itself became a family heirloom, carefully preserved, pulled out on special occasions so that new generations could touch the wool and imagine that night. The night that started it all. The night that proved that sometimes kindness to a stranger could change the entire course of your life. In the end, Sophia and Tobias's love story became the foundation of something larger than themselves. It became the heart of the family they created, the legacy they left behind. And every time someone wrapped a cold person in a warm coat, every time someone offered help to a stranger in need, the echo of that February night in 1886 lived on, because some love stories don't just change two lives. They change generations. They become the bedrock upon which entire families are built. And the story of Sophia and Tobias Sullivan, of a shivering woman and a compassionate cowboy, of a coat freely given and a name offered with love, became exactly that. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the Broken Arrow Ranch today, still tell the story of how it all began. Still believe in the kind of love that starts with kindness and grows into something eternal. Still look at that preserved coat in its glass case and marvel at how something as simple as offering warmth to someone in need could create something so enduring. That's the power of love, the kind that Sophia and Tobias shared. It doesn't just fill the present moment. It echoes forward through time, touching lives not yet lived, creating possibilities not yet imagined. It becomes immortal, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the simple act of two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, until their love becomes the story that defines everything that comes after. And it all started on a freezing February night in Cody, Wyoming, when a cowboy saw a woman shivering outside a general store and decided to give her his coat. When he offered her not just warmth, but hope. Not just employment, but a future. Not just companionship, but love. when he wrapped her in his coat and eventually asked her to wear his name too. And when she said yes, she wasn't just accepting a proposal. She was accepting a promise, a partnership, a love that would outlast them both and become the foundation of generations to come. That's the real magic of their story. Not that it happened, but that it continues to happen. Every time their descendants fall in love, every time they choose partnership over independence, every time they offer help to someone in need, Sophia and Tobias fall in love all over again. Their story becomes new again, lived through fresh eyes but carrying the same essential truth. Love is worth the risk. Kindness matters. And sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when you're at your most vulnerable, when you're shivering in the cold with nowhere to go and someone offers you their coat. Those are the moments that define us, that change everything, that become the stories worth telling. Sophia and Tobias Sullivan knew that. They lived it. And their love story, starting with a coat given freely on a cold February night, became the kind of forever that really does last beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything except the human heart's eternal capacity to love and be loved in return. Their story ended, but it also never ended. It lives on in the ranch they built, in the family they created, in the legacy of love they left behind. And somewhere in the whisper of wind through the Wyoming mountains, in the creak of the old ranch house porch, in the warmth of a coat passed down through generations, Sophia and Tobias are still there, still in love, still building there forever, one day at a time.